Hey everyone, thanks for joining me today. My name is Vandalyn Nichols, and I'm excited to share with you my final presentation for MBA 650, Anthropic versus Copyright. Today we'll be examining fair use and the future of AI training, and we'll be doing this using the three-step ethical business leaders decision tree. Let's get started. If you remember back to the beginning of this class, the first assignment Professor McAllister gave us was to introduce ourselves to the class. And reading through these introductions, I realized there's a lot of avid readers in our class, myself included. So my question to you readers is, have you noticed this copyright page on any of your books lately? It's definitely gotten longer, and it's definitely gotten a lot stricter. There's parts on here that include things such as use of this publication to train generative AI technologies is expressly prohibited. No reproduction of any electronic or mechanical means is allowed. These do not input declarations from the publishers is what started me thinking about AI training and copyright and led me to choose the article that we're discussing today. Anthropic lands partial victory in AI case to shape future rulings. That's a long title. What's the story here? Who is Anthropic? What did they do? And why is this important? Anthropic is an AI company that trains large language models, or LLMs, to read, write, and respond like a human. What did they do? To train these models, they used lots and lots and lots of books without authors' permission. So, of course, that led to the authors being upset and filing suit, claiming copyright infringement. So what did Anthropic do with these books? Why did they need them? Well, their goal was to create a large central library that they could use as a resource to train their language learning models. And to do this, they needed lots and lots and lots of books. So they started acquiring books. And they did this through a couple different means. One, they purchased books, both ebooks and physical books. And two, they pirated a bunch of books from websites. After they got all of these books, they took them and they converted everything into digital formats that AI could understand and read. Once they had these digital formats, they started taking pieces out from books, whether it be a paragraph, a chapter, a whole book, and they would make combinations of these little subsets of the books. And they would add, remove, swap out different combinations until they had the right data mix. And they were looking for what data mix would perform the best, what data mix would respond most like a human. And as I was going through this article and the case, I had a few just like moments. And some of my takeaways that I wanted to make sure to include are these few things. One, Anthropic made money. It did over $1 billion in annual revenue last year. Two, the idea was that for this large digital library, they were going to retain the files forever. They had no intention of deleting these files even after the language learning model was trained. Three, this couldn't just be any writing. What was more highly valued and what put out the best outputs was things were language learning models that were trained with the creative stuff. It wasn't stuff that was just trained with our grocery list or our to-do list. There was a heavy emphasis on quality narratives and things of that creative nature. The other thing that is important to recognize here is that the books, or parts of the books, remember how we talked about the subsets, they were copied a bunch. Every time they would make a different subset, the part of the book that was being used would get copied again and then switched out and copied again and switched out and copied again. And the copying was so extensive that the company Anthropic even admitted that it was impossible for them to even estimate how many times they copied things in total. And the last thing that is important in my mind here is that the LLMs could recite entire works. So if there was a portion of a book or the whole book that was used to train a language learning model, it could essentially recite that whole book if asked. There was a compressed file stored within that language learning model. And we'll want to keep these things in mind as we walk through the ethical business leaders decision tree. So the first step that we want to look at are the legal issues at play. Is the proposed action legal? So we have two sets of books here. We have the pirated books and we have the purchased books. And essentially in this case, what Judge Alsup decided to do is he said, okay, we've got pirated material, we've got published material. We're going to split this into two different classes. We know that pirating books is illegal. We're going to save that class for a later date. In this order, we're just going to look at the purchased books. So that's important because the conduct in question is narrowed down here. Can AI companies legally use purchased copyrighted works to train their models? That's what the legal question is here. Let's look at copyright protections. Copyright law is intended to protect creative and expressive works. It is limited to the expressive elements of a work and not the functional ideas contained within it. So copyright acts like a fence that gives creators control over their work. Using copyrighted material usually requires permission or payment. It protects these creators by helping them earn money and maintain control of their works. The exception to copyright is fair use. Fair use allows people to use a copyrighted work in certain situations without the creator's permission. And these situations are things like education purposes, research purposes, innovation purposes. In Title 17 of the United States Code, Section 107, the fair use doctrine is an affirmative defense to a claim of copyright infringement. The analysis considers 4 factors: purpose, nature, amount, and market effect. So in this case, Anthropic is saying this is not copyright infringement because we are using this content as fair use. Judge Alsup said we need to look at this fair use and see if it qualifies using these 4 factors. The first factor is purpose and character of use. Why and how was it used? Is it being used commercially? Are people making money off of this? Well, yes, we said Anthropic is making money. It does over $1 billion in revenue. Is this for educational purposes? Well, maybe. It's AI, so we're getting a little bit out of that as a society, right? Is the use transformative? Does it change the original work? And yeah, it does. It does change the original work. It's breaking it down to data so that these language learning models can create outputs. What's the nature of the copyrighted work? Is it highly original and creative? Because that gets more protection. And we said, yeah, remember the AI language learning models did better when the data sets had highly creative material. That was what was favored. The third factor is amount and substantiality. How much was used? And here we know the whole thing was used in a lot of the cases. It was all scanned in and saved, and then pieces of stuff was repeated over and over and over and over and over again. And then the last factor is the effect on the market value. Is this going to hurt the copyright holder? Is this going to hurt the author? Or in the order of fair use, Bartz versus Anthropic, this is how Judge Alsup ruled. He ruled that in regards to the purpose factor, he sided with the AI company, that this was in fact transformative, that they were changing the way that this information was being used and it was being created into something new. On the nature factor, he sided with the side of authors, saying that this is, yeah, it's creative. It's very creative in nature, and creative works generally get more copyright protection. In regards to amount, kind of sided neutrally. He said, yeah, look, we know that they're taking a lot of the work and they're replicating it over and over again, but they need that much for the language learning model to actually learn, and the information is transformative. So it's not like they're taking it all and using it all. It's being reiterated into something different, data to be analyzed. And then as far as the effect on the market, he also kind of judged neutral, saying that he could understand how this would affect authors, but they didn't actually have tangible proof that they were fiscally affected here. So in his order, he said that Anthropic's use of copyrighted books for AI model training was legal under US copyright law if it had purchased those books. Moving from the legal question, let's look at the effect on stakeholders. Does this maximize stakeholder value? Let's move into step 2 and look at the effect on shareholders and stakeholders. Does this action maximize shareholder value? So what are the impacts on shareholder value if AI is allowed to use copyrighted material that's been purchased to train AI systems, language learning model systems? Well, short-term impacts obviously reduce costs. They don't have to pay for as many licensing fees. They just have to pay for the books. And those reduction of fees are going to boost profits in the short term. But in the long term, there might be some pushback. If you're not giving these authors royalties, you may have some creator pushback, and you may have some trust issues in the community as well. So ultimately, in the long term, there might be some public trust issues, there might be some reputational damage. So those are all some things that need to be considered. Let's look at the impact on authors. So from a short-term perspective, if copyrighted material is considered fair use and can be used to train AI models without permission, obviously authors are going to be frustrated because they're not getting compensated for their work. As long as there's a purchased book, $5, $10, then that book can be put into an AI model to learn and train. So they're not getting compensated fairly. And then they're probably going to lose trust in copyright law altogether. In a long-term aspect, we risk the idea of AI taking the place of traditional authors. If authors aren't going to get paid for their work, maybe they just stop writing altogether. And now we're looking at AI writing everything. Next, let's look at the impacts on AI users, us, you and me. So in short term, if these companies don't have to pay other fees to use these copyrighted materials to train their AIs, we're going to have access to smarter, higher performing AI tools. That means that we're going to save time, and we're probably going to save money because there's not as much cost in the upfront for the company, and that will probably translate down to the user, hopefully. But the long-term impacts is that, one, it could be great. It could dramatically improve AI innovation. So over time, our AI could just be getting better and better and better. But on the other side, we're looking at, over time, the pool of data that we're pulling from might dwindle because authors aren't sharing their creativity anymore. So that pool is getting smaller and smaller. So over time, does the AI erode? Does the content it's putting out erode because it doesn't have as much creative input going in? And then also, we're going to be looking at long-term trust issues that are arising with using AI. We're already seeing that. We're not using them in class or on campus in certain aspects of business. So there's still a lot of trust issues here that we have to hash out. Impacts on the legal sector, your lawyers, your judges, your congressmen, your government. So short term, if we're allowing AI to train their systems with copyrighted material and we're considering it fair use, then we're probably going to see a lot of surge in lawsuits, because if I was an author, I wouldn't be happy about this and I would want to put it to the test too. We're probably going to see more legal disputes over what is considered fair use and if this really is considered fair use. They're going to be burdened with higher caseloads. They're going to be faced with amending copyright laws to adapt to encompass AI technologies. And in the long term, we're looking at even further bottlenecking. We're looking at further updates to copyright laws. We're looking at further lobbying from both AI companies and creative industries so that we have more laws and we have more understanding of copyright as it applies here. And courts are always going to have to continually balance innovation in AI with the protection of creators. Now that we've looked at the impact it has on stakeholders, let's look at the ethical implications of the conduct in question here, using copyright material to train AI. Is this ethical? We're going to first analyze this ethical dilemma using categorical moral reasoning. And if you remember from class, categorical moral reasoning is a principle-based ethical analysis. And when we're looking at this, we're essentially asking a couple critical questions here. We've got universalability. What happens if everyone acts this way? And can this be scaled without causing harm? And then the flip side of that, reversibility. Would we want this action done to us? So if we look at the universalability here, what if everyone did this? Okay, so the question would be, can all companies ethically use legally purchased copyrighted works for training? And I think the answer here is no. If every corporation just bought one book and then just printed copies of the book and said, oh, we're using this for training, I just don't see that standing up. I don't think that that's ethical. I can't say that that holds here. And then the other question is, could storing copyrighted data forever in digital libraries be a universal rule? And I think the answer here is no. That makes me cringe. I'm sure it makes authors cringe. I would hate for data to be stored somewhere forever for anyone. Now, if we flip that and we look at reversibility, how will we feel if this was done to us? Would AI companies accept creators exploiting their systems without compensation or permission? I think the answer here is definitely no. I mean, we're paying a monthly fee to use all of these. And then the next one is, would AI companies accept their sensitive data being stored forever? And I definitely know that this answer is no, because these AI companies, they're not going to want their algorithms and their codes and all of that stored somewhere forever and forever and forever. So moving on from categorical moral reasoning, because I don't think that this stands up here from an ethical standpoint, we move into utilitarianism. And utilitarianism, if you remember, is consequence-based reasoning. What we're looking at here is maximizing the benefits for the most involved while minimizing harm. And in doing that, we're going to ask ourselves the following questions. Who benefits? Who gets harmed? And do the positive outweigh the negatives? So assessing this situation, if we're allowed to use copyrighted works to train AI, who benefits? Well, obviously the AI companies benefit, the innovators benefit, society benefits, and end users benefit. Who gets harmed? Well, creators and authors get harmed, the creative ecosystem gets harmed, and probably litigation and resource or waste in that sector is harmful. Now, here, do the positives outweigh the negatives? In the short term, I think they do, yes. We all get to use AI and we pay less, but in the long term, it flips. In the long term, the creative sector starts to erode. There's no creative ecosystem anymore, and there's a loss of trust here. So I think if we're considering consequences here, this action is not going to stand up underneath utilitarianism either. The third ethical analysis that I chose to use was the virtue approach. And the virtue approach focuses on ideals. What kind of people and society do we aim to become? So you're essentially looking at cultivating character traits or virtues that enable to reach our highest potential for good. And in the virtue approach, you'll ask yourself the following questions. What kind of people do we as a society become when we use AI this way? Which virtues or absence of virtues are fostered by this practice? And does this application promote ethical development within our community? So let's break this down. What kind of company should an AI firm strive to be? And I think some of the corporate standards that we're looking for here are integrity, fairness, generosity, and prudence. Integrity, are AI companies acting honest and transparent? Are they being fair to creators and publishers? Are they generous? Are they being generous to those people that are helping them develop the AI, spreading out fiscal benefits? Are they being prudent? Are they making wise decisions and thinking about the long-term impacts here? And then the next question is, what kind of community should we be? Well, we would want to be a creative community, a respectful community, a community that cultivates trust, and a community that cultivates collaboration. And if we are practicing the conduct in question here and the AI training with copyright materials, is this fostering this type of community? And I think the answer to this is that no, these actions aren't fostering this kind of community as they are now. And no, AI companies aren't acting as we would want them to as things are now. So that leaves us to our last step, and that is looking at and analyzing what is the best path forward. So I think the best path forward here is that we've got to learn how to balance innovation and ethics. And that's very complicated. And I think this is just a step, and it's going to take some more refinement. But the first thing I think we need to be thinking about is transparency. We need these AI companies to disclose where they're getting their information from, how they're storing it. We need fairness and recognition. We need them to consider licensing fees and royalties and other compensations, and maybe even developing new ways to credit contributors and how they source things in AI, or how in outputs they resource or cite things. I think that we need to foster consent and respect. As the company, as Anthropic is a company, we need to obtain permission before using copyrighted works. We need to honor those do not input demands from publishers that we saw at the very beginning of this presentation. Then I think we also need to be collaborating. We need to build partnerships with publishers and creators, and we need to be asking these individuals, how do you see this moving forward? This could be a great resource, but how do you see our partnership working here? And then last, I think we need an ethical code of conduct and this industry. So I'm a healthcare provider and I'm a practitioner, and in our industry, we do have a code of conduct. We take an ethical oath, and I think that that's something that we need to consider here. Is there a code of conduct centered around AI, how we're using it, how we're using things to train it? And I think we just need to make an industry standard here so that we move forward ethically. And that way we can align the expectations from the creator standpoint and from the AI company's standpoint. Again, balancing the innovation and the ethics. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation today. If you would like any more information, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to share. I've included my references in the next slide. Hope you guys have a happy holiday season. Thanks.